I grew up in Mankato. Actually, my folks, I was born in St. Cloud, Minnesota. My folks had a farm up there. And when I was roughly 2 years old, Dad had an opportunity to come to Mankato and work for Archer Daniels. And so he elected to do that. I think it was tough farming back then, and dairy farming and long winters, things like that. And he was probably ready for a change in life. He built air bases during World War II and with a construction company and things like that. So, and my mother's folks were down by Mankato, and I think they moved down by family also. So I don't remember the farm up there or St. Cloud, but Mankato was always my home.
So tell me about your time in school in Mankato.
All right. Back then, you could start when you were 4 years old. You could go to kindergarten. Sometimes my mother says she wishes she would have held me back a year, and things like that. And I went to Franklin Elementary and Franklin Junior High School. And then I tell the kids, I went to Mankato. I tell stories to kids when I substitute, and they say, well, did you go to East or West? I says there was only one Mankato High School back then. And there was 435 of us in our graduating class. And it was a 3-year high school. You didn't get to know all the kids in your graduating class. They came from 3 different high schools, also parochial school there like that. So, but graduated in 1967. And, a different era. I guess I'm a baby boomer, and I think I grew up in a great era. I had wonderful parents too, by the way.
Tell me about your siblings. Do you have siblings?
Yes.
Tell me about your family.
I have a brother that's 10 years older than I am, and he lives in Florida. And he's, of course, retired. And I have a sister that's about 2 years older than me, and I'm the youngest of the family. So my dad was 40 years old when I was born. So he was a different generation too. He grew up on the farm up by St. Cloud. And he worked hard as a young man. He only went through 6th grade of school.
Kind of common back then?
It was. My mother grew up in South Dakota, and then the family had moved by Mankato when she was a young girl, so that's where they met. They were working on a farm. They were both kind of farm hands, if that's what you want to call them, and that's how they met and got married and started a family. 1935 is when they got married. Kind of, Dad always said it was the heart of the Depression.
Wow. And that had to have been tough. And those lessons that they learned carry through into how they lived their lives. Can you give me an example of something that you remember about that?
I always remember my dad saying, that, they had it tough as kids, things like that, and they wanted to provide a better family situation and raise the children and give them more opportunities than what they had. I think that hard farm life and different things, they had a real perspective, just like we have perspective now compared to young people. They certainly had a different perspective for us as well. But yeah, I don't think I could have asked for better parents. I love them dearly, and sometimes even though they're gone, I think of them daily, and I always talk to my dad. I always think, Dad, what would you do in a situation like this? So,
I don't think we ever get over that, do we?
No.
So it's 1967. I zigzag around a little bit. Let's go back to 1967. You graduate from high school, then what?
Then I lived that summer up north by my brother in Bemidji, and I was going to go to a technical school up there. And that didn't work out, and so my dad says, well, why don't you come home? And I went to Pillsbury Baptist Bible College for 1 year in Owatonna. It was kind of a last minute deal, but I think that was really good. It was a school that really regimented and things like that. But, you know, I was not a great student in high school by any means. So I can relate to kids that struggle. I still have some learning disabilities today. I really do. And so I love to relate to kids. And again, I try to tell them stories that are relative to what maybe they're going through and what life was at. I always tell them it's good for you young people to, you know, deal with an older person. And again, people probably don't know that I substitute teach a lot and things like that.
Yeah.
So I still have contact, and the kids are good therapy for me. So I
Good.
appreciate coming to mainly Worthington High School and substitute teaching and being around them and stuff like that. And they do treat me great.
And we're always glad to see you here at the high school. Let's talk about Vietnam.
Okay.
How did that all, were you drafted?
Well, no, but the draft was real relevant then. And after the year of college, you know, I started working at a place in Mankato, and I was going to get drafted, so I looked into enlisting. And I enlisted in the Marine Corps. We had a recruiter there that went to our church, and I talked to him, and he said, let's look into this aviation guarantee. And so a lot of people don't know that the Marine Corps has fixed wing, which are jets, and they have helicopters and things like that. So when I enlisted for 4 years, and then I had that guarantee that you would be in the Marine Air Wing, and providing you passed the schooling that you went to and things like that. And so that gave me an opportunity. It was really, I went to Memphis. It was a Navy school, but Marines went there as well. And then after going through that school, I was an aviation supplyman. And then at that time, I had a couple choices of where I wanted to go. And so I picked Cherry Point, North Carolina. And when I came home from boot camp is when my wife, Kathy, and I got married. And so she went with me. So even during the time that I was in the service in North Carolina and Memphis, she was with me. We were young. We were both only 19. And then we lived there. And I think we got to know each other, things like that. We hadn't had any children. And so it was, I guess, a learning experience. I had a wonderful commanding officer. I think of him to this day. And he gave me some real responsibilities and things like that.
So were you ever in Vietnam?
I was.
How did you get, let's talk about how you got
There.
over to Vietnam.
This commanding officer could kind of keep who he wanted to, and sometimes he had quotas to fill that, you know, maybe a new person would come in and he would keep some people that he was comfortable with or was maybe more experienced. But once you became an E4, which was a corporal in the Marine Corps, then I take that back. Once you became an E5, a sergeant, then Headquarters Marine Corps in Washington would give you orders. And I think they reviewed things and they found out I had never been overseas or Westpac. And so they cut me a set of orders. And at that time, there wasn't any Marines in Vietnam. They had basically, things were kind of, I think they were trying to reduce troop level and things, but I still went Westpac, is what it was called, and I went to Iwakuni, Japan. And so when I went overseas, you know, it wasn't initially to Vietnam. And I went to an F4 squadron, VMFA 232 was the name of it. And actually, if the people ever want to look up, one of our jets is in the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. I
Oh,
believe it's the
interesting.
only F4 in there, but there's pictures of it and things like that. And that's one of the jets that our pilots had, our officers. I got to work with some great people, I really did. And some of these pilots, you know, were a little bit older than me, but we were getting close, and this was the last year that I was going to be in. I was glad that when I did go overseas, that I was a sergeant and had been around a little bit and things like that. Then we would have to go to the Philippines once in a while, to Subic Bay, because Japan didn't want our pilots shooting or practicing off the coast. And so there was an area down there that the F-4 pilots or other pilots would train and fire their weapons. And Subic Bay, if you're not familiar with that, is where the big aircraft carriers would come in. And these would be from off the coast of Vietnam, things like that. We stayed down there, I remember once, 30 days. We went back to Japan. And then in the spring offensive of 1972, we were called in to Da Nang. And Da Nang, it was an air base there. Things were really starting to go kind of south as far as the war and things like that. Da Nang is along the coast, the northern part of South Vietnam. The North Vietnamese regulars were only 50 miles north of Da Nang. And so one day our commanding officer gathered us all together, and there was another squadron also that was involved, and he says, "We've been called into Vietnam." And so 18 hours later, when he gave us the initial word, we had to pack everything up that we could. And this just isn't going back and folding your clothes. This is equipment
Right.
and things. The Air Force came with their 141s and loaded things up. 18 hours later, we were from Japan to Da Nang. And that was just unbelievable. I mean, we were there in a heartbeat. The way my wife found out about me being in Vietnam was in the Mankato Free Press. Came out on the front page the next day or two, whenever it was. I still have the article at home. But she said 2 squadrons, it said in the Mankato Free Press, 2 squadrons from Iwakuni, Japan, was called into South Vietnam. And it didn't give what squadrons it was. And so the first thing she did was call our friend, the recruiter. He couldn't say, you know what I mean? But anyway, through letters and contacts, she found out, that was how she found out that I'd been called into Vietnam.
Tell me, what do you feel like when you're going into a war zone?
You know, all of a sudden you get there that night, and they didn't have any place for us to go. It was we actually kind of had our duffel bags, and they kind of had a roofed-in area, and they said, you know, we got off the planes, and they put us there, and we kind of slept there overnight. And in Da Nang, there was basically rocket attacks every night. And the Viet Cong or North Vietnamese would shoot rockets. You know, they would try to hit planes, but they were in big concrete silos. Usually that didn't affect the planes. They were protected pretty well. They would try to bomb the runways. They would shoot a few rockets off, and then they would take off because there was C-47s that would fly around Da Nang, and if they seen some rockets being shot off, they would go over with those, they called them puff-to-magic dragons, and they would lay down a 50 caliber round in every square yard. And so if that area, they would, you know, try to, it wasn't like they had bunkers and they would shoot rockets and then they would run. It was a disturbance. They would hit some things sometimes. I remember one night they hit a fuel depot and it kind of lit up. I mean, just like from night to day as far as the things like that. Until somebody is really trying to kill you and you go through that, you don't have that. You grow up watching TV, you grow up watching Westerns where they're shooting at each other, but you have no concept of somebody trying to do away with you. And I know there's people that had it a lot worse than me, you know what I mean, but you were just trying to do your job. You would work. I don't know if I've ever worked so hard in my life as far as doing long hours and day after day. You never knew what day it was. I've heard people say that when they came back. It could have been a Wednesday, it could have been a Sunday. Every day was like Groundhog Day. It was this deja vu. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you would have a calendar, you'd try to keep track, but you don't. It was amazing. I felt sorry for our pilots that would take off, and you know, they would go on sorties and things like that, and they were you know, doing the things that they needed to do as far as their orders and protecting things and probably bombing troops or whatever it was. You know, you didn't ask all the questions. It wasn't a social type of thing whatsoever. But I did feel sorry for those, even though we were getting rockets at night. We controlled the daytime. Sometimes I felt that they controlled the night a little bit. And you were tired and, you know, you would try to get some sleep and things like that. But if you did have rocket attacks, you were supposed to get up and go to the bunkers and things like that. After a while, you would just kind of try to sleep it off and things like that. So it was different. I'm glad I did not have to stay in Vietnam for a full year. I had had a school cut approved when I was in Japan, and they honored that. I had another great commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Mag, and one day he called me in, and he says, "We're going to send you home." And so I had had a school cut, and I went to Mankato State, and I was able to come home.
What did that feel like when you found out you were going to get to come home?
We always said in Vietnam, we want to go home to the world. And I tell students or my own kids, you know, it's just a different environment until you're placed in things like that.
Right.
You don't realize what it is. And so our squadron was going to go to Thailand. And I think that's one reason that they honored that school cut. And so he says, "We're going to send you home and we're going to honor that school cut." And so I was able to come home and start at Mankato State in June. But otherwise I wasn't supposed to get out until in October there. So I got home and I came home to Treasure Island in California and things like that.
When you say you wanted to come back to the world, what was the world like when you got back? Had it changed?
I don't know. When I got back 30 days, kind of a little bit early, and they weren't going to discharge me, which was fine. And so I spent 30 days in Treasure Island, and so it kind of helped me wind down just a little bit. the other thing, I was able to talk to my wife on the phone. When I went to Japan, she was pregnant. So our oldest daughter, Jerusha, was born when I was in Vietnam. And, you know, by the time they tracked me down, you know, I didn't know about her for 3 days because they went through the channels and they went to Japan and things like that. And then by the time they traced me down, unbelievable, you think now with the instant communication like we talked about, you would know it right away. But I didn't know about Jerusha being born for 3 days. But it was a different world. You came back and I started school. There was protests going on, you know, at Mankato State and downtown, and you didn't necessarily tell people where you came from. Things like that. I got the same job back that I had had before I went into service, making windows and doors. And so I was able to work, and sometimes I would try to arrange my classes where I'd have classes in the morning, I could work in the afternoon, or vice versa, things like that. So it was nice to get back home and have a daughter. And I always will remember being at the airport and Kathy, my wife, you know, handed me Jerusha, and I got to hold her for the first time and see her.
Wow, that must have been very exciting.
No, I was just thankful to come home, and we had lost a couple pilots and things like that. So I always think of all these people that you did know, and things like that, and they never had the opportunities that I did. And I was blessed to go to school on a GI Bill and those sorts of things.
Lives cut short. There were plenty of those.
Yep.
And you got, like you said, you were fortunate enough to go on to college. And tell me about your college experience. What was your major? Was it education?
Yes. I was some people say shop teachers, and they used to call it industrial arts. Now they call it industrial technology. And I had good experience in high school. I certainly probably wasn't going to be a communications or a math teacher or things like that. I always tell kids, even to this day, do something in life that you like and enjoy. And so I enjoyed geography and some history and things, social studies like that, but I always loved woodworking, and so I took that, and you had to take other classes as well, whether it was electronics or photography, metals. So they tried to get automotives, they gave you a background in different things, but woodworking was always my love. And so I had the opportunity then to come here in the fall of '76 and start teaching.
So you started here in the fall of 1976.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about what changed in the time. I can't remember, what year did you retire?
Actually, I took a rule in '90. I
Okay.
took a retirement. I have COPD and some asthma and working in the shop and the
Sure.
dust and things like that. And so I was almost 27 when I started teaching, and I'm glad I was a little bit older. I think coming to Worthington, it was pretty much a Caucasian community. When I first came here, the principal asked me, I got to tell you this story. He asked me the first question out of his mouth, he says, "What did you learn in the Marine Corps?" And I don't know what he expected as an answer, but I said, I've given that a lot of thought. It's really was working with a lot of different people. I worked with some brilliant people. I worked with some people that there was draftees, that were great. There was draftees or enlisted people, whatever, that were probably a little lazy. Maybe they didn't have the work ethic that they should have. So, and different nationalities. So you got to work with many, many different people. And I always loved wrestling, and I got involved in that. I was kind of involved in high school, and then when I substitute taught, or not substitute, it was a student teacher at Mankato West at that time. I was involved with that while I was student teaching. And then I got to meet Ken Drogemiller, who was the head coach here at Worthington. And he gave me a call the spring of 72, excuse me, the spring of 72 is when I got out of the Marine Corps. In 76, he says, there's going to be an opening here in Worthington.
Okay.
And he says, I'd like to see you apply. So he was the one that called me and kind of gave me the heads up on it. And I came down here for an interview, and actually I was hired even before I was graduated from Mankato State. So I never had the degree, and maybe they do that yet to this day, but I came down and interviewed. And so I got the job here, and I knew it was going to be primarily woodworking here. So that was great, and I got to work with some good people. Had a kind of an older mentor. I got to mention his name, Dean Nordell, and we taught together like 3-4 years, and then he retired. And we have an old farm place out in the country too, and he would come out and help me and do things, and we still live in that place yet today.
Tell me about your other, during your time here, tell me about your children.
We have 5 children, and actually it seems strange, 24 years apart from the oldest daughter, Jerusha, to our youngest son, Jaron. So they're all spread out, and a lot of them are 6, even 7 years apart. So Jerusha was born in 72, and then she passed away of pancreatic cancer in 2013, and she had a little boy. She has 2 older girls as well, but she passed away, and we have a grandson that lives with us, and he's 12 now. His name is Zion. And so we've never been without a child in the house since 1972.
Wow.
So it's 52 years now, pushing 53 years, that's just our kind of lifestyle at home. And we have an acreage, and we've done different things, and I'm glad that we live in the country. I think it was a good environment. We were able to raise some pigs, some show pigs for 4-H and things like that. So we were involved in kind of some breeding and farrowing and things like that. The kids were involved in showing in 4-H and being involved in that also.
So tell me about your other, you've got Judd.
Yes, our second oldest is Justin.
Right.
And he works for Merck, Intervet, whatever you want to say. He helps with the research farm out there. Judd, our next son, he's had some different jobs, and he really loved woodworking and shop things too. And he living south of town there on an acreage. And then we have JL, a daughter, and she works at one of the banks here in town. And then our youngest son, Jaron, he actually lives up north now. He's working for a landscape company up there as well. Then we have little Zion and our grandson, and he keeps me busy. And he and I we relate well together. So my day is really pretty structured, to be honest with you yet.
Yeah.
And just the things.
Well, in the 52 years you said that there's been children in your home, a lot's changed in that time.
Yes.
Parenting advice, what do you have for us for that?
You know, all of them are different. That's for sure. You know, and sometimes even to this day, you would like to change their life, but you can't. I guess all you can do is give them advice. Things change. You know, whether it's I got to speak highly of the kids here in Worthington and stuff like that. And you think, well, everybody thinks back in the day, you know, things were perfect. Well, they weren't. You know,
Right.
there's problems. There's kids maybe that would drop out. I think they have more opportunities now with ALC and stuff like that, and being worked with. Sometimes the kids would drop out, and maybe they would go to work and, you know, be forced into that
Right.
kind of lifestyle, or you worry about where kids come from, and you worry about their home life, things like that. I try to, once in a while, I say, if you don't, you know, if you need something or somebody to talk to, I'm not a counselor, but if you feel comfortable talking to me and stuff like that. And again, I try to tell kids stories and appropriate stories and things like that. And as you get older, you know, you can relate to different things. And so you try to, you know, just encourage them, things like that. And
So kids aren't that much different than they
no,
were when you started.
no. Actually, I see a lot of, it might be just me, of course. Sometimes I tell them, I can't change your life in one day, you know, when I come in here, but, you know, to substitute teach, things like that. But I appreciate the kids.
Let's talk about, you talked about Jerusha, and that is unimaginable to me, how hard that must be.
Yes.
How do you deal with hardship in your life?
You know, you think of that every day. It gives me I think I'm a pretty strong-willed person. You know, you want to make the best of every day that you can. Like when I mentioned little Zion and things like that, I worry about him or his future,
Right.
things like that. And I try to make the best child that you can, or give him the best life that I possibly can, and make it a normal situation. He goes to school in Wyndham. A van comes and picks him up, then brings him back home. He goes to a setting 4 over there, and I think they've really been doing a good job with him. And sometimes he can, in transitions, he can be tough, you know, he can be a little stubborn and things like that, but he's maturing, and I love him dearly. And sometimes we do things in the summer. We go to the park, and he very routine oriented for a little Downs boy. And I guess a lot of them are. This is kind of new to me, you know what I mean? Every time we had a child, you were happy and blessed that, quote, that they were normal as far as that, and there wasn't any handicaps, special needs. But this opens your eyes, and actually maybe substitute teaching or having kids for 30 years, you would get some kids in class that had disabilities, and so you had some sort of an idea of what it was about. But as far as living on a day-to-day basis, every day, you know, every morning you get up and you do the things every evening, and he's so good about going to bed and getting up and happy. Yep.
So he's been a blessing in your life, of course.
He's made me a better person, sometimes I say it, and I try to. Anyways, you try to do the best job you can, and you appreciate the one day at a time thing more too.
I understand that. I do understand that. What's something that surprised you in your lifetime?
Oh dear. Uh, you know, I did, was an assistant coach here for 25 years in wrestling and things like that. I was always an assistant, and then there was an opportunity or whatever to become the head coach. And these kids I knew, and I had the honor of being the Minnesota State High School Wrestling Coach of the Year. I always say the kids were so good that they made me this.
Made it easy
Yeah,
for you.
so that was a surprise or a shock. And long days, especially if you go home and you were doing some pig chores and the kids and wrestling and meets and traveling and stuff like that. So that was a very honor situation for me. And some of those kids, I look at the trophies down, the pictures down in the wrestling room, and I always remember the different personalities and stuff like that. And
They're all different.
yes, they are. And I would wrestle a lot with them, and I could go on and on as far as individuals and telling stories about those kids as well. And I relate that sometimes to the students that I'm even dealing with yet to this day.
What do you hope for your future?
To stay healthy. To keep things going. My wife struggles a little bit with some neuropathy and diabetes and stuff like that. And so she's not always able to do as much. And then the things that we have to do at home with a little one yet. And so I try not to dwell on that again, but I try to just take and do the best job you can. And you kind of wake up every morning and you think, well, let's get it done.